Welcome to Inside The Mavs. Kevin Gray, Mavs insider for 105 through the Fan, joined as always by my partner Grant Afseth, Mavs beat reporter for Mavs SI and Dallas basketball. You can find us on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. Appreciate you joining us, however, and wherever you may be listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast for free. We're also on YouTube as well. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. Got a lot to get to on this latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Grant, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Doing well, coming off a Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully everyone had a chance to get a little bit of rest and relaxation in. And of course, the Mavericks always in the news with respect to what's going to be happening this offseason. Kyrie Irving, D'Angelo Russell, some definite notes that we have to touch on. But before we get to any of that, we finally have an NBA Finals matchup between the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat. Before we get into our Mavs conversations today, what are your initial thoughts on the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat going to be matching up in the NBA Finals this year?
Yeah, I think it's going to definitely be interesting to see how the Heat handle Jokic. He's given a lot of talented centers problems throughout the Nuggets run, and seeing how, Bam Adebayo is such an important piece for the Heat defense with his versatility, but he's going to have to handle that matchup directly. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of impacts the Heat's defense as a whole, because they have some guys that have really stepped up that don't have perimeter size, that are going to, really be put to the task. Like guys like a Duncan Robinson start to become more of a problem to have on the court due to their defensive limitations when you have a team like the Nuggets. So it'll be interesting to see, like, kind of like the chess match, like who can we actually afford to play? How do we adjust? How many different schemes? And, especially the zone defense will be interesting because the Heat like to throw that out a lot, and the Nuggets ripped that apart. They were I believe they're the most efficient zone offense in the NBA. So that they're like, kind of like, the card that they keep up their sleeve might, want to be put in the shredder against the Nuggets for sure.
It's going to be a fun matchup. Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat with Caleb Martin. Caleb Martin was spectacular during the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm sure Michael Jordan wishes he had him back on the Charlotte Hornets at this point. Meanwhile, for the Denver Nuggets, Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, who has been phenomenal in these playoffs, now have a chance as the number 1 seed in the West to take out what was the number 8 seed in the Eastern Conference this year. And before we get to the Mavericks here, I have to say this because Eric Spoelstra, now going to his 6th NBA Finals as a head coach, has now, for me, Grant, solidified himself as one of the all-time coaches in the history of this league, because to do what he has done from being a video coordinator back in 1995 now to being a 6-time NBA finalist appearer in the championship round, it's just amazing to see his growth as a coach. But more importantly, Pat Riley handpicked Eric Spoelstra way back when. It even told LeBron James, look, you're not firing this guy. This guy is staying around. And Spoelstra has put himself in position as one of the all-time coaches in this league.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely been impressive. It's crazy to think about all the changes to basketball, that have gone on through that entire period, all the different superstars that he's, been a part of, had to, work with LeBron, all that stuff. And then, continue to build onto their team culture with different star players like, Jimmy Butler, find all the undrafted guys, work them in and get the most out of what they've got. There's very few people in the coaching that you can say get as much out of what they have than Eric Spoelstra, for sure.
And I know talking positively about the Miami Heat on a Mavericks podcast, not necessarily good business, but at the same time, got to acknowledge what the Miami Heat have done now, taking on the Denver Nuggets. The NBA Finals get started as we record this. They begin on Thursday, with the Denver Nuggets being the home team in this series by virtue of having the best record of these two teams going into these NBA Finals. The finals are, of course, where the Mavericks want to eventually get to at some point coming out of the West, but there wasn't any shortage of news with respect to the Mavericks as we get ready to turn the calendar from May to June here in the next couple of days. Let's start with some things that we started to hear and read over the weekend, specifically as the Mavericks get ready for the NBA draft and into NBA free agency. We'll start on the free agency front because we saw Grant over the weekend, Mark Stein on his Substack reporting that the Mavericks don't want any parts of Lakers guard D'Angelo Russell in any potential sign and trade scenario with Tinseltown if Kyrie Irving wants to be a part of the Los Angeles Lakers, with Stein reiterating that the Mavericks intend to re-sign Kyrie Irving, obviously going into this offseason. And we know D'Angelo Russell struggled, especially in the Western Conference Finals, where he did not even play in the Game 4 loss to the Denver Nuggets. But at the same time, there was a player that if you were thinking about what kind of trade scenarios could be out there for the Mavericks if Kyrie wants to go to Los Angeles, D'Angelo Russell may have been one of those players. But it sounds like, Grant, the Mavericks want no parts of D'Angelo Russell coming to the Mavericks if that was a scenario presented there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, D'Angelo Russell, as an option for a sign and trade package for Kyrie Irving, I think that definitely would be an unappealing scenario for a team. So it makes sense why the Mavericks wouldn't have interest. But even if you look past like whether the Mavericks want D'Angelo Russell, especially in that particular context, it would have required his representation to want to go to the Mavericks and for both sides to have agreed to a number. And I think in general, that factor very much complicates the Lakers' kind of outlook for a Kyrie Irving pursuit, because Russell carries that $38.7 million cap hold this offseason. And, they're going to have a resolution with Russell one way or another, whether they're re-signing him and adjusting that cap hit, if you will, or however he counts towards their cap, or sending him elsewhere in a sign and trade, or he just leaves and signs in some other team's cap space. That's the only way, like those are the only scenarios other than rescinding him, making him an unrestricted free agent without the ability to bring him back, would be their pathways to kind of handling his situation. Mm-hmm. And if you're, in a typical superstar's, pursuit, those usually take a little while. And even Kyrie on his Instagram Live alluded to this could take me 1, 2, 3 months. 3 months is a little concerning for everyone involved. But if he's going to take his time, that's a really rough, balancing act of all the order of operations. If you're the Lakers GM, to kind of okay, well, we can't lose D'Angelo Russell pursuing Kyrie Irving and being left empty-handed. That just can't happen. So it's very much harder than a video game if you're playing NBA 2K GM mode or whatever it's called. It's definitely makes sense why the Mavericks wouldn't want to necessarily take on Russell, and then all the complications added to that being even feasible definitely make it challenging for sure.
And I'm sure for Mavericks fans who have watched the NBA playoffs, watched D'Angelo Russell throughout the course of these NBA playoffs, there were things at times that he did well in terms of the scoring punch that he could provide, but virtually unplayable on the defensive end, which is not something that the Mavericks are trying to see more of this upcoming year. The ability to have someone, at least at the guard position, who can not only help take some of the scoring load off of Luka, but able to provide some measure of resistance on the defensive end has to be a major need for this team based on what they're trying to do. And for D'Angelo Russell, he's in a very interesting situation given what he is trying to do, securing another, long-term contract somewhere, whether it be with the Lakers or somewhere else. But it doesn't sound like the Mavericks would be interested in his services, which I think based on what we have seen from him, sounds like a prudent decision, or at least alleged decision by the Mavericks, given what we saw from D'Angelo Russell. And along those lines, Tim Cato, during his Mavericks mailbag that he had over the weekend as well, someone had posed him a question about a potential Kyrie Irving sign and trade to Los Angeles. And part of what Tim's answer was, which I found to be very interesting, because as he's answering the question, he puts it in and you read it. It's like, oh, wait, this is kind of newsworthy given the ideas that we were trying to figure out with what the Mavericks may want to do in terms of a sign and trade scenario. And Cato is saying that the Mavs don't plan on assisting any other team in acquiring Kyrie Irving, which if you're a Mavericks fan and you hear that, it gives you a little bit of pause, because don't necessarily want to see Kyrie Irving walk out the door for free. But at the same time, the Mavericks feel like, look, we have the best offer on the table. We can give you more money and more years than anyone else. Either you take our best offer, or you can go and find that somewhere else with an Indiana, a San Antonio, a Houston, some of these teams that got a bunch of cap space but are not ready to compete, and see what you can get out there, or try to force yourself into a situation. It sounds like, Grant, the Mavericks don't plan on assisting him in that way, which I think in some ways is a little bit risky given the volatility of what could be these negotiations if it comes to that, knowing that the Mavericks may be drawing somewhat of a line in the sand already when it comes to how they want to move forward with Kyrie in that way.
Yeah, I think in general, if you're kind of looking at the landscape as a whole and you're making those like from the Mavericks perspective, and you're making those calculations of like, okay, where would this max offer or very like significant offer come from that Kyrie would actually want to play and they would want him to play for them? As you said, a lot of those like rebuilding teams, like the Rockets or Spurs or Magic, they would be the teams that have money that could, reasonably pursue him if they there was mutual interest. But like based off their market determinations, that seems to be not the case. So then it's a matter of, okay, well, you need our help to get wherever you need to go. But I think in general, that can be, like, as you said, a risky approach, because now with the way you're allowed to talk to your own free agents the day after the NBA Finals, I think with the way, Kyrie and the Nets kind of had their discussions where, he didn't like what he heard. So then it was like, all right, well, I'm going to go elsewhere and have my bird rights belong to a team that would be more willing to accommodate what I seek. I think it's not the same, obviously, as the Nets, because now the Mavs do have his bird rights heading into free agency. But you do run, I guess, somewhat of a risk where you're like kind of like giving him an offer he doesn't like if you're going to make that offer, if you're not coming out with the max. And then he's like, all right, well, now I can workshop this thing and, talk to the teams that I may have interest in, or they may have interest in me. But I guess like that just comes down to teams having their information. If it's accurate, then your play, if you will, in what the game of negotiation, I guess will work out for you. But then like last year, it's different circumstances as well. But with Jalen Brunson, we can pay you more than everybody else. You would need our help with the sign and trade. Those were kind of the themes. But then the Knicks kind of manufactured that space out of thin air. But what makes it different is like, I don't necessarily see right now there being a team that would make those types of moves to pursue Kyrie, given that he's 31, has the injury history, and that's a lot of money. The main factor, that's a lot of money to make up, because Jalen didn't get the max. He got like, a big contract, but he didn't get the 40 plus $47 million starting salary. So that's that's a lot of money to move. So that's where it's different. So I could see like the approach, but the timing as well, like what we talked about with D'Angelo Russell and sign and trades, the timing matters a lot. And that initial conversation that they're allowed to have, if it doesn't start with a max, I feel like that's where it could get, a little interesting, if you will, because I'm sure the understanding in general is that I'm going to a team that's going to give me what I want, that's going to trade for me at the trade deadline to take my bird rights.
And it's interesting because the Mavericks are dealing with a very high profile situation when it comes to Kyrie Irving. And as much as I'm sure you and I and others would want to see the Mavericks kind of keep some of this under wraps, given the sensitivity and the player that you're dealing with, having indications that the Mavericks may not be willing to assist Kyrie with any kind of sign and trade or assist other teams in acquiring him, and being able to have some of that already being put out there, I'm not sure if that's the best negotiation tactic to have some of that already being revealed, whether it's reported or not, that Kyrie Irving could be in a situation where he looks at the Mavericks, who have done everything that they could to help him feel celebrated and not tolerated, in his own words, but also to feel like he's a true part of this organization. It sounds like the Mavericks, in reporting or not, are very convinced that they have what it takes to get Kyrie Irving back outright, versus having to do anything in terms of, roster gymnastics, salary cap wise, to make sure that he's back with his team. Because if they don't bring him back, now we're talking about how do they open up additional cap space to try and go after some of these free agents, or try to make room for players via trade. Because if we look at it, the Mavericks could clear $20 to $30 million in space if they don't bring back Kyrie Irving, don't bring back Christian Wood. Dwight Powell's an unrestricted free agent. If you move on from a guy in Reggie Bullock, whose $10.5 million contract is guaranteed on June 28th, there are some real decisions that are going to have to be made rather quickly, especially if you're trying to have some type of flexibility if Kyrie Irving isn't back with this team this upcoming summer.
Yeah, it definitely gets more complicated because then you, depending on how quickly you kind of reach that conclusion, some of the bigger free agents could be off the board. That you'd also have to really have some contingency plans in place. And the complicating factor there is that the draft happens before free agency.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to really like make your play with the 10th pick based off what you truly think is going to unfold. And if you're making a move assuming Kyrie's back or to get him to come back and he doesn't return, that's challenging. And it's just challenging in general to have that kind of order where your main asset isn't available to you, like as a liquid asset, if you will, for like a trade, where you haven't already made the pick for the prospect. If you have to make a bigger move, and being limited to a 2027 future first round pick as your only future first rounder that you can throw into a trade this summer makes it also very challenging. So I think it'd be very, very complicated to get a player equal in kind of basketball talent as Kyrie, considering the contract situation is what kind of lowered his price on the market for the trade to even happen in general. So that really puts you in another complicated situation where you're hoping an opportunistic scenario like kind of happens again, and you're also not necessarily stocked with the assets to make that move. So I think, it definitely would be a complicated outcome.
Yeah.
The more we talk about team constructions, the more I'm like realizing why general managers get paid so much money.
Yeah. GMs, salary cap, experts, capologists, whatever kind of name you want to put on it. There's a reason why the ability to have a job like this is so complicated because of all the factors you talked about a little bit earlier with the CBA, the ability to talk to players, as soon as the NBA finals are over with, obviously with the second tax apron and all the things that are coming with the new CBA, there's a lot to juggle here. And I think that's something that we'll have to have a conversation down the road with in terms of, is this front office equipped to be able to handle the changing landscape of what this CBA is going to look like, given how they are trying to do a little bit of star chasing here with trying to retain Kyrie Irving, but the way that it feels like the NBA is moving toward, your ability to build rosters with young, cheap talent and then be able to retain that talent for the years to come may be the way that this goes, because the books here are going to get real complicated. Even the Celtics right now are dealing with that situation because they got a decision on whether or not to give Jaylen Brown his supermax contract that he's eligible for. All indications are that it feels like the Celtics are going to do that. But again, these are the kinds of things that you have to start thinking about based on the way that the CBA is going. And the Mavericks right now are kind of in that spot where they have to thread a needle about keeping an eye toward the future, but at the same time, keeping what is right now your most valuable asset outside of Luka Doncic to be able to even go toward that kind of future in that way.
And it's crazy, again, just to keep framing it like that it is, because the guy's 24 years old. Like, as when we talked to Rafael Marlowe, he mentioned the comparison with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being very similar aged with his timeline with the Thunder. And then you think about the Mavs, it's just crazy to think you have that much pressure for a 24-year-old superstar. With the 10th pick, a lot of teams would just be like, all right, well, we'll just take the best player available. He'll grow together, and we'll just keep adding players like Jaden Hardy's that kind of pop up that we can kind of bring in. But it's a lot of pressure having to be perfect with the 10th pick, and then you only have a 2027 first rounder to use as well. It's very very interesting summer for sure.
Yeah, and even with that 10th pick, as we kind of look toward the NBA draft, having a player being drafted that's enticing enough for a team to want to make a move to go get one of your players. I think that's one of the underrated, aspects of this whole conversation is while yes, the Mavericks have the 10th pick to be able to use in any kind of trade scenario, you have to have something desirable for a team to even want to engage with you in order to make a move. So there isn't necessarily a guarantee that the Mavericks are able to move that 10th pick, given on who they possibly select. We saw reporting from Tim Cato, again, of The Athletic, that the Mavericks are not interested in drafting Grady Dick, the guard forward out of Kansas, which obviously puts in the focus whom could be that 10th pick there and whether or not it's desirable for a team, given their situation, to even want to engage with the Mavericks. What are your thoughts on that based on what we're starting to hear in that light?
Yeah, I think if you're kind of evaluating those trade options with the 10th pick, as you said, the players available at 10 when the pick's on the clock, that matters a lot for the value. Because, like as we, evaluate it, you have to want to trade up if you're another team. Like there has to be a reason. That's like every year when, like I remember when, Cade Cunningham was getting, going through the draft and the top pick, and there was a lot of excitement around him. And it was like, okay, well, if the Thunder don't get the first pick, don't they just have like 1,000 first-round picks they can just throw at the whoever gets the number one? But then it's like, no, we're good. We're not interested in that. And it's like, oh, okay, so there's a like it's kind of a false option in a sense where when there is that desirable prospect, the team most likely is not going to move the pick, and then in general, there's not going to be that draw to trade up aggressively. For someone's pick if that type of prospect isn't available. And that's why I feel like every year, in a sense, like when the top 10 happens, there's all this like trade speculation for like 1 through 10. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that was a really boring draft. Like no one did a trade. And it's like, well, I mean, like everyone went where they were supposed to go for the most part, and teams are happy with their result. And then, whoever was available wasn't the draw to make that aggressive trade up. So I definitely agree with that. The players available matter a lot, but then also the contract that you're requiring someone else to take matters a lot too. Like if you have just in a vacuum the 10th pick, but you're packaging like a player that, like on a contract like Davis Bertans or, even Tim Hardaway Jr. I know his contract descending, but he's still, if you look at like total salaries before, new contracts happen, he's still like, I think in like the top 100. That's like, if you look at how many starters there are in the NBA, that's still like kind of on the higher end, relatively speaking. So like him being a shooting guard, not necessarily like, that like taller wing, like a 6'7", 6'8", that kind of limits the, the options you can necessarily throw in lineups, which lowers like the appeal for like the, trade value. So then, even if that's your best bet for, a contract to move, or even a Maxi Kleber who had an injury that kept him out for a couple like months during the season, like that's also a lowered value for a contract. Overall, you're just not left with a lot to work with. Maybe like a Reggie Bullock, at around that 10 million mark with partial guaranteed salary. But then again, it's like, if you're a team that needs to add wings, are you going to really like move off of a wing and then need more wings? Like it's just, it becomes a very challenging sort of scenario if you're going to devalue the 10th pick in that trade with a bad contract, and then, kind of hope to address a need. Because then it becomes a matter of, do you need to throw the 2027 pick in there as well, or a Josh Green or a Jaden Hardy? And then all of a sudden you're also like kind of balancing, like how much are you backtracking the roster now if you throw in one of those young players? And then also how are you depleting your future outlook by moving a 2027 first? Because you've already moved to 2029 first if you're the Mavericks. So
that's right.
2027 and a 2029. It's like you're starting to really like mortgage the future in a sense if you're gonna like make like that move has to work. Like it's a lot of pressure on that one move for sure.
Because on top of that, you don't have any second round picks for the next 7 years either. So it's not like you can maybe find some value in a second round draft pick because you don't have any. We saw them last year be able to do that by going and getting back into the second round and going to get, a Jaden Hardy. So, I mean, there's ways that this can happen, but it sounds like there's not a lot of flexibility in order to do it for them to be able to be in that position to even get there. I mean, some of the names that could be there, Jarris Walker from Houston, 6'8", forward center, 19 years of age. As the more and more I start to think about it, guys like Taylor Hendricks, Cam Whitmore, I would be shocked if they were there at 10 by the time we got to draft night and the Mavericks were picking there, because it sounds like both of those names are going to go within the first 7-8 picks. And then you're looking at, a Walker there, maybe taking, as Rafael Barlow had, described to us in our last episode, a Derek Lively out of Duke, with obviously the ability to block shots, and the rim protection is something that the Mavericks, desperately need there. Maybe and I don't know how much Mavericks fans will even be on the idea of this, but maybe even trading down in the first round if there's something that you don't necessarily want to reach for at 10, maybe to pick up some extra value there. I don't know if that's an option. What would you think about something like that as a consideration, even with the idea that the Mavericks need to try to get as much help as they can, either win now or at least build assets to be able to have other things to move in the future and try to acquire, win now talent?
I definitely think that's an interesting idea. If you can get a veteran player to kind of fill a spot while making one of those moves, like I don't know, like a particular team, but like say you can get like a big man, like I don't know what value you'd have to throw in, or like how badly Atlanta would want to move up to 10. But if you can get take advantage of a team that's probably needing to make some decisions at like the center position or on the wing, due to financial reasons, maybe you could get I guess like a Clint Capella, hopefully, if again, like the general framework isn't a specific framework, but just the general thought is that, to move down, if you have to add more value or the other team has to add more value, whatever that may be. But adding a veteran that kind of establishes that, or fills that established need for you, with a proven talent. I think that's definitely kind of like the best of both worlds in a sense, if that exists, like that option does exist for you, because you are getting that proven player, but you're also not completely moving out of the draft. I don't know how far you'd have to move down for that to be a viable option, or what teams would necessarily be interested in moving up in that 10 spot. Because as we just said, a lot of those really intriguing prospects may be gone by 10. So unless there's a team that's really motivated to move up for Grady Dick, I don't know, that might be a challenge. But I guess in a way, in general, at 10 overall, I know some people have said his previous projections for a Derek Lively have had him going later. Some people have the idea of trading down. Maybe if your intel suggests that's a viable scenario. But also, I think it's important to not be afraid just to take a player you believe in, in kind of disregard what a mock draft may say, because there's teams that have you could say on draft night where you're that was a reach. Like Cam Johnson to the Suns is probably the best example. And now there's teams that are talking about oh, how much money can we throw at him in restricted free agency? He could be our solution. He's a helpful player for the Suns. Now on the Nets, it's that was considered a draft night reach, pretty aggressive reach, if my memory is correct. So, if you believe in it and it's, you just fill a need and there's some still ceiling to be reached beyond that, immediate need, that sounds like a pretty intriguing option. But, I think all options definitely need to be explored with the trade scenarios. If you get creative with it, you almost have to, with kind of the, I guess you could say, depleted set of assets that they have at this time heading into this draft.
This front office is going to have their work cut out for them, whether it be GM, Nico Harrison, Andrew Baker, Michael Finley. This front office is going to have to do a lot to thread a lot of needles to be able to make this work and be able to be in a position where they're, number one, keeping Kyrie Irving, with that being the number one, piece of, agenda this offseason, but also with the 10th overall pick, being able to find value there that can be moved to another team, or if they have to keep the pick, finding a player that can give them the best opportunity to continue to build toward the future, but also contributing now to be able to help them contend in the Western Conference. Before we end, our show today, obviously there's been some coaching moves that have been made in the association. Nick Nurse is going to be the new head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers. Adrian Griffin is going to be the new head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, because Giannis said, "Get me Adrian Griffin," and the Bucks were like, "Okay, all right, we'll do it." So he's the next head coach there. So that still leaves a few openings in Toronto, Detroit, and the most high-profile one right now in Phoenix, where, of course, Nick Nurse, I find it very odd. Now, I know Nick Nurse has, history working with Daryl Morey when they were together in Houston. Nick Nurse coached the G League team back in 2011, 2012, I believe was there, when Daryl Morey was still working there as an executive as well. But at the same time, Nick Nurse saying no to the Phoenix Suns with Kevin Durant and a prime Devin Booker to go coach a team with, yes, Joel Embiid, but no certainty that James Harden's coming back there, no certainty that Tobias Harris is coming back there, and a little bit more difficult road for them in terms of expectations because Nick Nurse trying to get the team out of the second round. I just found it very odd that he would look at Phoenix's situation and says, actually, no, I don't want that, but I'll go in Philadelphia and go coach there, which leaves Phoenix now with their opening. And as we were detailing before the show, the finalists for that job are now Doc Rivers, how ironic, Kevin Young, who was the associate head coach to Monty Williams before he was fired there in Phoenix, and Frank Vogel, who is the third finalist. And we've heard reports that if Vogel doesn't get one of these jobs, that he could be the lead candidate to replace Greg St. Jean on the staff for Jason Kidd. Your thoughts on that when it comes to Phoenix and their situation and Vogel being one of the three finalists there?
Yeah, I definitely think, I think the general idea for the Mavericks has been that, if Frank Vogel can't get one of those head coaching jobs, then, they could be a stopgap for him, for a year as the associate head coach, and, basically re-enter the market, I would assume, the year later. And I guess, looking at the market as a whole, Monty Williams potentially taking a year off kind of makes it interesting because that's another, coach of the year off the board that a lot of teams would like. Like Detroit would love to have Monty Williams, and I think
they tried.
Yeah, they've tried. I think they tried again. I think they tried and tried again. So if that's not an option, Monty Williams off the market, then Doc Rivers becomes all the more like appealing for teams because he's the an established name that's won a title and. However, like his previous stops, you could say the 3-1 leads and all that stuff, he's still an established name, as opposed to a Kevin Young. I just find the Suns coaching situation very interesting because, I think I saw reporting that Kevin Durant wants Kevin Young, as the coach, if I'm not mistaken, which makes it kind of interesting because, if I feel like if they really, really wanted him, he would probably be the head coach. If he's option one, he would be the head coach by now. But how much of Kevin Durant's kind of desire or whoever else on the roster, I think other players have wanted him as well. How much of that is kind of keeping him in the consideration, or is it truly organic from top down? Is he getting real consideration? That stuff that's hard to kind of read until you see more. Kind of transpire from the coaching search. But, I think with Frank Vogel, I haven't really heard him being linked, just reporting too much to Phoenix until now. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of just an interesting outcome. I know, Doc Rivers hasn't, I guess you could say he was linked to Milwaukee before they made their hiring as a dark horse candidate or whatever they described it as. But, I think if he doesn't end up in Phoenix, it's just kind of interesting to think about where the remaining spots are. There are a lot of rebuilding teams that are kind of out there, and Frank Vogel's tried that himself, with the Orlando Magic, and it didn't necessarily work out that great. So if you are kind of evaluating it from Vogel's perspective, the Suns probably are the most appealing, and then maybe sitting it out and kind of evaluating where you're at next year might be number two. Because a Toronto team, I don't think there's really been much determined about their plans yet. In reporting, I'm sure they have a better idea behind the scenes about who they're going to potentially trade and all. But in general, it's if they're in kind of a pivotal inflection point, if you will, as a franchise, do you want to go there? And then Detroit, they could have been interesting had they got the first pick, but they also probably wouldn't have been. A team for Vogel, they would have been really appealing for someone else. Mm-hmm. So overall, it's to me, it's probably if you get the Suns job, I think that's the clear option if you're Vogel. But I think definitely the Mavs as like kind of a stopgap makes a lot of sense based off the other options that are out there. So they'll be interesting to kind of monitor as the Suns kind of progress in their coaching search.
Yeah, if I'm Frank Vogel, Doc Rivers, and I'm in a situation where I'm a championship head coach, I've been into plenty of deep playoff runs, coaching a young up and coming team like a Detroit with a lot of developmental players is not something I'm probably interested in at that point in my career. Even Toronto in their situation, they haven't decided whether they want to continue to remain all in on Siakam, OG Anunoby, and others building around Scotty Barnes, or if they want to blow the thing up and start all over again. So that kind of makes that job a little bit more, like there's a lot of question marks there for a coach of a Rivers, of a Vogel status to say, well, what direction am I actually going here? And based on that direction, what kind of coach are you looking for? So at least for me, I get the sense that Vogel will wind up in Dallas. That's just my gut feeling on it, that he won't get the job in Phoenix, whether it be Young or Rivers getting that job, and then Vogel being able to possibly join the Mavericks. That's just the gut feeling that I have, is that Vogel would be a part of the Maverick staff, which would make, again, a lot of sense given the connection that he and Jason Kidd have and the ability to be able to help out, in a various amount of ways with this coaching staff here in Dallas. That's just the gut feeling and sense that I get when it comes to Vogel and his situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when you look at some of those rebuilding teams as well, like, because those would probably be the other options. Like one name that's not taken a job yet that, is known for the player development success, Kenny Atkinson would probably be competing with him. And I'm sure there's other coaches out there that would also be given consideration. I just think, in general, if you've already tried that sort of job, like the Orlando Magic, as Vogel has done, that's just tough to kind of jump back into if you've already been waiting. Like you might as well just wait a little longer and be the front of the assistant coaching bench, if you will, for an organization that has a coach you've already worked with. And, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. You can't really go wrong with Luka Doncic,
correct,
top of the roster. Like a lot of people, like Igor Kokoshkov, like he had success and then got a different, opportunity as well. So like you can come in and just re-enter the market later if that's, the route that's, desired. And that would make a lot of sense. And, I guess if you can kind of even evaluate it from a reverse standpoint of what happened with the Lakers, like when Jason Kidd went there to be the front of the bench, many people were like, he's probably just waiting for Frank Vogel to get fired. Now it's like after missing the play-in, maybe, Vogel can come and then be like, all right, well, I mean, if things don't pan out for Dallas this year, at least,
there's a built-in candidate. Better. There's a built-in candidate right there.
A year later.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there's definitely a lot of layers that are interesting to think about for sure.
The coaching carousel will continue to go round in the NBA. It'll be an interesting summer to see where Detroit, Phoenix, and ultimately Toronto do with their head coaching situation. But Frank Vogel is one of the finalists, but also has been linked to Dallas as possibly being a part of Jason Kidd's staff there. As we get out of here today, Grant, tell the folks that they can find you at the work that you're doing as we get ready to turn the calendar from May to June as the Mavericks get ready for this important offseason for them.
Yeah, for sure. If you want to read, the latest covers on the Mavericks, news and analysis, check out, my work on DallasBasketball.com. We'll have a lot of stuff leading into the draft and, definitely ahead of Kyrie Irving's free agency as well, for sure.
Got a lot of cool things working over there at SI. Grant's done a terrific job. Got you covered all over it, whether it be news and rumors, all the things surrounding the Mavericks. Grant's got you covered there over at Mavs SI. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Grant Asseth. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Got some special stuff coming up on Inside the Mavs, working on a Mavs fans' favorite guests that we're hoping to have on here on an episode relatively shortly here. Just follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports to see who I'm talking about, and you'll be able to see and hear about that on our next episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, we really appreciate you downloading and subscribing to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get the podcast for free. Well over 1,000 downloads now for our first 4 episodes. Sincerely appreciate all the support. Also, the 5-star ratings, the reviews that are being written for the podcast. Continue to drop those in there. Those are much appreciated. The more 5-star ratings you put in there, the more reviews you put in there, the more and more the podcast gets recommended for others to check out and listen to. So again, thank you so much for either subscribing on YouTube or also downloading and subscribing to the podcast here. That ends our episode of Inside the Mavs here. Again, appreciate Grant and all his insight on this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Just search Inside the Mavs and be able to hit that 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. For Grant Afseth, my name is Kevin Gray, Mavs Insider for 105 through the Fan. Until next time, we'll talk to you later on Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you later. Peace.